Hello, welcome everybody to the Gin Lounge tasting. My name's Phil and I'm up here in very sunny Gateshead, and I'm imagining you perhaps sitting in a lovely lounge with a roaring fire, or maybe not, maybe you're sitting in the garden with the sun going down. But anywhere you are, I'm hoping that you're going to have a lovely evening with a gin tasting that you might remember very fondly. The idea is not to test you or to make you feel that you're doing some sort of seminar. This is about having fun and tasting the spirit that you obviously enjoy. So I do tastings up in Newcastle and the Northeast generally. I had my first taste of gin at the age of 8, which was on the Boxing Day morning when I went downstairs after all my family had had a Christmas party, and I saw a green bottle and decided to have a little taste. And I didn't taste it again for a long time, I can let you know. When I was 18, I moved to Holland for 2 years to study. And that became a really important part of my journey in terms of gin drinking, and that'll come in later. But I do love gin in all its different forms, the new sort of quite different flavoured tasting gins, and also your more traditional ones. And today we'll have a chance of tasting 6 styles, which you've got in your box. So the Gin Lounge. So the Gin Lounge is a fantastic small family business based in York, and they've been going for nearly 2 years now, and we have an ugly older brother called the Whiskey Lounge who've been around for around 10 years, and they've already been doing festivals and tastings around the country. So it was obvious when Amanda, who was the founder of the Gin Lounge, wanted to create a new organization that would focus on gin. She had huge amounts of experience and has been able to set up, as I say, lots and lots of tastings around the country and festivals all the way through the year. So keep in touch with us because there may be other opportunities for you to enjoy and maybe meet us all in person. Okay, so we're going to taste 6 gins, which is a terrible chore, but I'm sure that you're up to the task. What we're going to do is I want you to try them initially in their neat phase form. Now, probably you don't normally drink your gin neat, but it's important from our point of view tonight to try and use our full senses and get the full taste of that gin. And the way that we're going to do that is try it in its neat form first. But obviously, once we've had a tiny taste of it in its neat form, we can then add some tonic and try it, see how the flavors change. So in between, I'm going to talk about the history of gin, how it's made, and I might even have a little rant towards the end about premium tonics. Who knows? Okay, so in what order are we tasting the gins? So what I've done is I've put numbers on mine. So those are your 6 gins. The first one I'm going to try is the London Dry. The second is the Distilled. The third is the Old Tom. The fourth is the Navy Strength. The fifth is Bathtub. And the 6th is the Contemporary. Okay, so I'll remind you of which one we're drinking as we're going through. So don't worry too much if you didn't catch that straight away. All right. You've also received a booklet. And as far as the tasting is concerned tonight, what I'm going to ask you to do is to focus mostly on this page here. Okay, so this is the taste wheel. And on the outside, you can see that there are groupings for the types of botanicals that are used within gins. Now, botanicals are the natural ingredients that are used to flavor the gins that we all know and love. And obviously, we couldn't put every single different type of botanical that people use at the moment because the wheel would be huge. But we've put down the sorts of ones that you would normally find, and they're grouped into things like spicy, herbal, floral, fruity, citrus, and nutty. So the main thing I want you to be trying to do is that while you're smelling and you're tasting your gins, is I want you to be looking at those wheels, because sometimes it's hard to think of what it is, the name of the flavor that you've got, and that can really help. The other thing to say about the flavor wheel is that whatever your flavor you're tasting or smelling, it's okay. That's right. There is no right or wrong in this. Everybody's flavor and taste buds are different. And so if we went to a restaurant, for example, we'd order different food. Similarly, when we're tasting our gins, we may not pick up certain flavors because we're not particularly good at picking up those flavors, whereas other people are. It also has something to do with maybe the time of day, what you've just eaten. There's a whole range of things can affect your palate, particularly things like if you've got a cold and you can't smell very well. So don't worry if you're not smelling a great deal, or you're not getting all of the flavors that maybe you think should be in there. But because we've not given you the bottles with all of the blurb that you normally see, you're not going to be influenced, because as soon as I read on a bottle of gin has a hint of cucumber, guess what? That's all I can taste. So this way, you'll be able to use your flavors, your palate, to try and work out what you are tasting. All right. So when they are judging gins, when gins are being put up for awards, the judging happens in sort of three areas. The first is the nose, what it smells like. Then there's the palate, what it tastes like. And then the finish, obviously, the flavor that you're left with at the end. So when we're doing our tastings, what I want you to do is to focus on that nose, what you can get in the palate, and what you get on the finish. And there may be some flavors that either come in or out or go up or down in terms of flavor profile. So we'll see. Okay, so I'd like you to take gin number one. Gin number one, remember, was the London Dry. Okay, and I just want you to try, just pour a little into your gin glass. Okay. Now, all I want you to do is just to pop your nose in and have a smell. And the first smell that you're going to get is alcohol. Okay? Your brain now knows this is alcohol. So what you need to do is you need to drop your nose, drop the glass away from your nose, and then just keep reintroducing it slowly, and just maybe swirl it around a little bit to get more aromas going. And there you go. Now on the nose, I'm getting a little bit of citrus. I'm not sure what citrus, it could just be lemon. And I'm also getting a slightly sweet note. And maybe you're getting a sweet note in your gin, maybe not. But if we were writing the tasting notes for this gin, then I would write for this one on the nose, I can smell juniper, which is handy. And I can also pick up some citrus and maybe a little bit of sweetness. So possibly some licorice. Okay, now the second part is going to be the bit that maybe worries most people, because this is strong alcohol, it's a spirit, and therefore it's going to have that slight burn feeling on the throat. But I'm going to teach you a way to overcome that, and it's basically just diluting it. But the dilution comes from our own saliva. So in a minute, I want you to just make a small amount of saliva and then add a little bit of the gin into your saliva. And you've got to give it a full mouthwash. So right behind the gums, underneath the tongue, you can even lick your lips. And what that'll do is it's going to open up all of the taste buds around your mouth. So you will get the full flavor of the gin. If you just put it straight into your mouth and it goes down the middle of your tongue, only the taste buds along the middle of the tongue are going to pick up any flavor. And that isn't the full flavor of what this gin is. So a little bit of saliva, a little bit of gin. You will only cough if you haven't made enough saliva or you put too much gin in. So less is more, okay? Cheers. Now, on the palate, I got even more of the citrus that came out. I also got a little bit of spice. There's a little tingling going on the edges of my tongue. And there is still that sweetness. So maybe that sort of licoricey flavor is in there somewhere. But again, have a look at your flavor wheel and just try and work out what you are picking up. There's no right or wrong answers. And if I just close my eyes and I just breathe out, and then just close my mouth, what's that flavor that I've still got there? What's the finish? And with that, it's more of the sweeter flavor. Yeah. And that little bit of nice sort of lemony citrus going on. So that's how we can taste gins: nose, palate, finish. And if we taste it in its neat form, then obviously we're going to pick up all of those flavors. But as you probably do, you normally drink your gin with tonic. So you now just add a little bit of your tonic and just try the same process. It changes completely. On the nose, it's probably lighter. On the palate, definitely different again. Now I've got much more of the citrus coming out. And on the finish, not as sweet. So by adding tonic or any mixer to the gin, it is going to change the flavor, obviously. Okay, so now you've got yourself a nice gin and tonic. You've added some. Just sit back and I'll just explain a little bit about the history of gin, where it comes from. So about 1,000 years ago, people say that distilling alcohol in a spirit probably came out of places like the Middle East, Egypt, and it traveled from there around the world via the monasteries, for example, in the West. So what they were doing was they were using anything organic to create a spirit. So this is very, very sort of alcoholic, but it's got no flavor usually, no color, because when you distill, then those things would disappear. And that spirit, if you like, was used particularly in the monasteries as things like medicine. So they would add certain flavors to it because you might have a different ailment. So if you had a bad stomach, they might add some peppermint. And for different ailments, they would add different types of plants to flavor it. Now, in Holland, in around about the 1600s, slightly before, they were the first people to take this type of spirit, this flavorless, colorless, alcoholic drink, and they added juniper berries to them. And juniper berries have a particularly lovely gin flavor. So if you taste the juniper berry, you get this strong flavor of gin. There's also quite a lot of sweetness in there. And contrary to popular belief, juniper berries are not berries. They are actually female pine cones, tiny little wrapped up pine cones, which are full of oil and full of that flavor, so that when they drop on the floor and they're harvested or they're foraged, and then you add them to alcohol, it will give a gin flavor. The juniper gives it the gin flavor. And the Dutch word for juniper is jenever or genever. And genever or jenever became quite a popular drink in Holland. And when you were in Holland in the 1600s in the army, you had a ration of this stuff every day, quite a hefty amount. And the problem was that when you were going into battle, you had to make a decision. You drink all of your ration of jenever before you go into battle or afterwards. And most of them would drink it before they went into battle. And the British soldiers fighting alongside them as mercenaries saw this practice of Dutch soldiers drinking this jenever before they went into battle and called it their Dutch courage. And that's where that phrase comes from. It's a gin phrase, basically coming from the time when the British first saw people drinking jenever. So, if you go to Holland now, and I strongly recommend you to do it, if you go into a bar, you won't see any jenever behind the bar. It's always kept in the fridge. Like good gin should be kept in the fridge, to be fair, because it means it's nice and cold, brings out a good flavor. It means you don't have to add so much ice. So if you've never tried that before, maybe put your bottles of gin in the fridge before you drink them and just see what the difference is with the flavor. So the Dutch invented gin, okay? And it was just the addition of the juniper berries to give the flavor of gin. And as it comes to Britain eventually, that genever gets shortened to gin. And if you go to Holland now, I mean, I was there a little while ago, about a year ago or so, and this is a type of Dutch gin that I bought. In Holland, they drink it in that size glass, in that shape. It's always full right to the top as well. And you sip it a little bit like a whiskey. They don't put any mixers in. Although the younger people now are sort of using it in a way that you could put your mixers in. But this one is the color that it is because it's been put into a barrel. And so over 5 years, it picks up the color and the flavor of the barrel, a bit like whiskey. So Dutch gin, fantastic thing to drink, slightly less alcoholic than British gin. It's usually about the 30 to 35% alcohol. And surprisingly, good value for money. So if you're over in Holland, ask for it. Ask for Dutch gin or jenever or genever behind the bar, and they'll make sure that you get some. Enjoy, hopefully. Right. How Dutch gin gets to England, we'll talk about later. But what we're going to do now is we're going to try our second gin. Okay. So we're going to try the distilled gin. So distilled gin, add a little bit in. Same thing again, okay? So we're nosing, and then we're going to taste it in its neat form. Remember, you can add a little bit of saliva so you don't get that cough. And refer to your flavor wheel so that you can try and work out what you think are the flavors within it. Okay. Yeah, now that's quite different than the first gin for me. But maybe it'll be slightly different for you. Maybe you think the similarities. Whatever you can smell, taste, even sometimes it's the feeling in the mouth. So that one felt a little bit more oily in the mouth to me, a bit more viscousy. The first one was a little bit thinner. That's how different gins can feel sometimes, as well as taste. And again, if you just want to add some more tonic and try it again, you'll probably find the flavors are different. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So again, now you've got your nice little gin and tonic from number 2. Let's carry on. So in Holland, they were drinking Dutch gin. It comes to Britain, and it comes to Britain through William of Orange in 1689. So effectively, the King of Holland becomes the King of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. And he's William III of England or William II of Scotland. But effectively, everything changes in Britain. So we've been strongly influenced by the French for hundreds of years, ever since the Norman invasion. And our main drinks would have been beer, wine, and cognac brandy. Now, William of Orange was fighting the French. And so he didn't like the idea of the British buying wine and cognac from France. Anyway, it was a bit hard to get across the channel because we were fighting them. So he put the prices up enormously on things like wine, cognac, and he gave the population Geneva, Dutch gin. And to say that we liked it is a little bit of an understatement. Basically, the British went mental for it. We were absolutely addicted to the stuff, literally. Because there was no rules about the production. You could make it in your own home. Gin is a relatively easy thing to make in one form. And so people were making it in their own homes for their own consumption and also to sell. So at the early 1700s, about 1730 or so, 1 in 4 places where people lived, so not houses, but individual places of dwelling, so rooms inside big houses of multiple occupancy, for example. In London, 1 in 4 were making gin on the premises. And the quality was often very poor. Sometimes people would substitute or sell the poor people turpentine spirit instead of the base spirit that you need to make gin. And so there was awful sorts of things happening. And a lot of people were drunk a lot of the time. Men, women, children, animals, the lot. And it was a real issue. It was a bit like crack cocaine hitting American cities. It was awful. And this is the sort of time that you see referred to as, you know, the time of Mother's Ruin and Gin Lane. And so the government had to do something. And as usual, they had to change the law to make it happen. And it took quite a few attempts at changing the law. People weren't happy about getting the chance to make their own gin taken away from them. But eventually they managed to get it through. And so if you wanted to make gin, you had to have a license, and a license was the equivalent of about £20,000 now. Most people didn't have £20,000, only the richest families had that. And so they started to make gin. And the gin that they started to make was slightly different, because instead of it just being that sort of slight sweet flavored gin that your neighbor is, they added another botanical. They added coriander. And when you add coriander to the process of making gin, it stops it being as sweet. And the word that they used for not sweet was dry. And because the place that they first made it was London, it was known as London Dry Gin. And that style of gin, London Dry, is probably the most popular around the world. If you go to most places around the world where they make their own gin, like Spain, the Philippines, all over, mainly it's in a London Dry style. And it's a style that most people perhaps come to gin first. And it essentially just means that you make your gin with coriander and juniper. So it's less sweet, but you need to make it all at the same time. So when you're making the gin and distilling it, all of the flavors of the gin has to be in that process. You can't add any flavor afterwards. So there's a slight sort of technical difference between London Dry and other types of gin, in that you cannot add to the flavor of it afterwards. Okay, so London Dry we now have, and we also have another type of gin, which is called Old Tom. Old Tom was a style of gin, again in that time in London, when they started to bring in the laws to stop you drinking it. So people found a way of making gin, but they couldn't sell it in bars openly, and they couldn't sell it in shops in bottles. So the way that they used to do it was to try and get it to, they tried to get it to the people by a clever way. They used to put black plaques around the walls and the alleyways of old London. And if you saw one of these black cats on the wall, then you could lift its tail, or sometimes lift its paw, and put your penny in the slot. And underneath the slot, a little pipe, a little lead pipe used to come out, because there was a guy on the other side of the wall, and he would deliver you your shot of gin. And the style of that gin, strangely enough, was quite sweet. So although the British didn't like it as sweet when it was Geneva, when they created Old Tom, they did add sugar because it made it more addictive, and you would get more repeat trade. So try some of this Old Tom, okay? Just add it to your glass. And again, just go through the same process that we've been doing each time. So you're nosing it, and then you're tasting it. Give it a full on mouthwash and see what you come up with in terms of flavors. Yeah. Okay. So you probably noticed the difference between Old Tom and the previous two. Remember the first one being London Dry, the most popular form. Usually it will be juniper berries plus coriander, and then things like citrus. Sometimes they'll add other types of botanicals too. There's a lot of different flavors inside London Dry, but all the flavors have to be made at the same time, all through that distilling process. Whereas the second gin that we tried was distilled gin. Lots and lots of very famous types of gin, brands of gin, are distilled. And it means that they can add flavors afterwards. So after you've made the gin, you can then add some extra flavors like cucumber or some other botanical flavors. And that's okay. It doesn't make it any less a good gin. It's made in a different way. So when you see distilled gin, that's what it means. It means it can't be called London Dry, but it is made by distilling the gin and then adding flavors, some during the process and some after. And then finally, you just have the Old Tom. An Old Tom, this thing that goes back, way back into the long history of gin, traditionally sweeter, had a massive renaissance when the Victorians started to develop cocktails, because things like a Tom Collins cocktail will usually or should usually have Old Tom gin as the base spirit. So it's a good gin. If you've never tried Old Tom, you can get quite a lot of it now on the market. Lots of gin producers are creating an Old Tom version of their gins. And again, if you want to pop it in the fridge, you can either drink that. I've often drink Old Tom neat, or you can add something like ginger ale or ginger beer to it. And it can take that bigger flavor, if you like. It's lovely on a sunny day in a long glass, lots of soda water, some lime, perfect. So if you've never tried Old Tom, maybe you like it, maybe you're saying not for me, but try different ones. There's lots of different ones out there. Okay, so we can now talk about number 4. So number 4, you might have noticed the strength. So this is 57% alcohol. And it's known as Navy strength. I always thought it was because it was for the sailors, and the sailors obviously wanted it higher alcohol. But it wasn't. There's a real practical reason. And it's basically health and safety. If you were on a ship, a warship, in the olden days, you would have cannons. And in order to have cannons, you need to have gunpowder. And the gunpowder has to stay dry so that you can actually fire. If it doesn't, you're in problems. But on the ship, you also had rum, which was for the ration that they gave to the sailors. And they also had barrels of gin. And the gin was only for the officers because it was seen as a higher class spirit. Now, if you have a cannonball come in through the side of the ship, smashes some of those barrels together, and it gets into the gunpowder, of course, you can't fire the gunpowder. But somebody realized that if the alcohol or the gin or the rum was high in alcohol, so strong, then you could still light the gunpowder. And if you think about it, if you've got more alcohol, it's more flammable. So therefore, it won't ruin the gunpowder. And it was the job of an officer in the British Navy to check every single barrel that used to go onto the ship. And they would have to test it using that method. So they would take a little bit of gunpowder and put it on top of the barrel, take a little drop of the gin or the rum, and then they would light it. And if it lit, they had the proof, 100% proof, that that was safe to go onto the ship. And that's where the proof comes from when you see it on alcohol bottles. And in America, they talk about 100% proof, which is the equivalent of 50% alcohol by volume in the UK. Now, to be called a Navy strength gin, it's usual for it to be 57% or higher. So the only time I've noticed or taken notice of the fact that I'm drinking a Navy strength gin is usually when I stand up, because it can hit you quite hard. So you have to be careful when you're drinking your Navy strength gin, but don't be put off. because even though it might be strong in alcohol, it doesn't always taste like that. Lots of gins will taste quite spicy and they'll make the tongue tingle, and it gives you the idea that it's high in alcohol. Whereas with some Navy strength gins, you don't get that. And so you're not aware that you're drinking high strength alcohol. Usually on the nose, you can pick up that it's high in strength, but a lot of times when I've done tastings, and we've done just like this, blind tastings, people have not known which was which, and at the end I've said, which one do you think was the Navy strength gin? I would say good 40–50% people, most of the time, don't get it right. So, see what you think of your Navy strength gin. You might catch it on the nostrils. The other thing about Navy strength gins is that they often had more sort of deeper, earthy botanicals. So they were less sort of light and crisp than a London Dry. And that's why I think that a good old Navy strength gin is a lovely thing to have in the winter, next to the fire, just gently sort of sipping away through the evening on a good Navy strength gin, a lovely thing. And again, because it's quite a good, strong gin, you can use different types of mixes, like ginger ale. Certainly soda you could use instead of tonic, for example. And just see how you enjoy creating the nice type of gin and tonic that you would like using Navy strength. Often people get Navy strength mixed up with Plymouth gin. Sometimes they were seen as synonymous, but Plymouth, until 2015, it was a protected geographical indication product, like Camembert cheese or champagne. But for some reason, in 2015, they didn't renew it. And so now Plymouth gin isn't seen as like its own particular style of gin. And as I say, not all Plymouth gins are 57% or higher, so they're not all Navy strength. But if you want to try a gin that is similar in flavor, but less in alcohol, you could try a Plymouth gin. Okay, excellent. So, I know I'm rushing through, but you can pause and just allow yourself to go through the flavor wheel each time, and just try and work out what you're tasting. Okay. So when it comes to gin number 5, you need to understand about how gin is made. So remember I said that in London, 1 in 4 places where people lived, they were making gin on the premises. Okay, well, they weren't making gin in these lovely, beautiful, big copper vessels and distilling it. They were making it in what we call bathtub style. Now, if you just imagine an old tin bath, what you would need to do is you need to get your base spirit. Now, all gin producers use a base spirit. Some will make it themselves. Most people buy it in because it's often cheaper to do that. It's also safer because in order to make your base spirit for gin, it needs to be very high in alcohol. If you make a distilled gin, it's 97% alcohol. So that's quite dangerous to be making on the premises. So they will buy it in, and then they will redistill it, adding botanicals to it. But with bathtub gin, you just need to have some base spirit. usually made from grain. Doesn't have to be as high in alcohol. And you put your spirit into the old tin bath, and then you add your coriander seeds, your juniper berries, you add your dried lemon or orange, or you might put some fresh orange, fresh lemon in, and then you add any of the other botanicals that you fancy. You pop it into this big bathtub, and that's it. You don't need to do anything else. You just need to leave it alone. Stop the kids and the cat falling in. But if you leave it long enough, the flavors of the botanicals will start to come out and infuse that spirit. So if you can imagine something like vodka, okay, which is a base spirit as such, with very little flavor, no color. If you put that in a bathtub and then you add your botanicals and you leave it for a certain number of days or maybe a week or two, then the flavors of those botanicals will infuse that vodka and turn it into the best thing you can do with vodka, which is turn it into gin. Now, at the end of that process, you will only know if it tastes good if you keep tasting it as you go. And when you're producing bathtub style gin, which is also known technically as compound gin, that's exactly what they do. They keep testing it as they go through. And when it's finished, when it's got to that point when it's right, they get rid of all the botanicals and they're left with the spirit. Now, because it's been made by just letting the botanicals infuse, you'll often have color from the botanicals affecting the gin. So some compound gins, like bathtub gin, for example, will be a slightly different color. And this can make people think, oh, that's not right, it doesn't look like gin. But it's perfectly okay, it's completely natural. Other producers of compound gin decide that they would like to get rid of the color, so they filter that out, but still keep the gin flavor. So compound gin doesn't always mean it's going to be a different color than normal clear gin, but sometimes it can. So the bathtub gin that you've got should be slightly different color, and when you taste it, yeah, can you taste the difference? So where you had this sort of nice, crisp London Dry in number one, number two, slightly different flavor, but still distilled. Three, you had the Old Tom, which was that slighter, sweeter flavor coming through. Four, you've got the Navy Strength, deep notes, high alcohol. With bathtub, it's like you get little bits of, sometimes it can be really lovely and sweet and rounded, other times it can be quite thick, and you can feel it on your tongues, almost coating your tongue, almost like a slightly honey flavor, I think. And other times it can be quite nice and crisp, because compounding is just a way of making gin. And you can make gin taste different because of the botanicals that you add. The process doesn't dictate necessarily the flavor. So compound gin or bathtub gin, really easy to make. It's something that we do on one of our courses with the Gin Lounge, where in the period of an evening, we'll help you to make your own compound gin, your own bathtub gin, to take away with you after only, what, 2.5 hours? So it's a relatively simple process to learn, but obviously to master it, you've got to keep doing it over and over again and getting it perfect. So I hope you enjoyed your bathtub gin. Okay, now we're going to come to the last gin. And the last gin is a contemporary gin. And by that, basically, it's like, how do I bring you up to date? So I can remember back in about 1988, when gin was not a particularly popular drink. It had basically died in terms of a drinks brand. There's very few brands on the market. You'd be lucky if you went into a shop and seen more than 2 or 3. Gordon's, Beefeater was 2 of them. And then a couple of things changed. There was a change to the law, so it became cheaper to make gin, so the distilling license dropped down, and people like whiskey producers and craft beer producers who already had some of the equipment or most of the equipment and also had distribution chains started to make gin, but making it have a much more interesting set of flavors. It had a better story, though it was often very local. And because of that, people started to drink more gin. Also, a brand like Bombay Sapphire hit the shelves. And it basically woke people up, changed their perception from this old lady's drink, which is what it was known as, into something that was a little bit more contemporary, something that was a bit more interesting. And obviously, you go from, in 1988, just a couple of brands to now, if we went down to the Evil Eye bar in York, they hold the world record for the most number of different brands or different types of gin on sale in any bar. And yeah, it's about 1,320, I think. That's a hell of a lot of gin. And all of that has happened in a relatively short space of time. The last 30 odd years, and certainly in the last 5, 10, it started to boom. And every year people say to me, oh yeah, the gin boom is going to finish this year. It's, you know, it can't last forever. But it is. People are still buying as much gin, if not more, each year, and more brands are coming onto the market. Now, I know that's not going to last forever. And just like the first gin boom, when everybody was sitting in gin lane, a little bit worse for wear, nowadays it's not as bad, and we're being a little bit more sensible. But eventually, it may change, and the spotlight might move onto a different type of alcoholic drink. But I think gin has re-established itself as a really good quality spirit with a very wide variety of flavors, with also a very strong and interesting history. And it allows people to enjoy a drink without worrying that they've got to understand all the deep complexities of it. So the last one is a sort of, it's the style that's come out of this recent boom, if you like. And it's called contemporary, but it's sometimes referred to as New Western, because it came from Australia and New Zealand area. And the idea for that was that they said gin essentially is flavored with juniper. In order to be called gin, according to European law, it is a juniper-based alcohol product, spirit, that is 37.5% alcohol by volume or higher. And that's it. So juniper-based, 37.5%. And the contemporary gin producers said, why do we have to have the juniper flavor as the front flavor? Why does it have to always taste like juniper? And so they started to come out with a whole range of different flavors, which could be front end. Some used things like vanilla. And I remember tasting one particular gin in Glasgow, and the people that were drinking it said, this is just like cream soda. And it was on the nose. massively cream soda flavour. But on the palate, as soon as you tasted it, the juniper was there. And it wasn't too far forward, but it was definitely there. And at the end, you just had this nice sort of light, soft touch of vanilla left in your palate. Others use cucumber as a front end flavour. And you've seen a lot of the soft fruits as well, so strawberries and raspberries as front flavoured. So whatever your contemporary gin is that you're tasting now, it will have a different front flavour, if you like. It'll be a lot different. Some have used pineapple, and there's a lot of experimentation going on. And some flavours are much easier to use than others. For example, the soft fruits are very difficult to get right, to distill soft fruits in the process. But I don't like all contemporary gins, I must admit. Some are like boiled down Haribo to me, but that doesn't make them bad gins, because if somebody likes it, it's a good gin for them. But what we shouldn't do is mix them up with a gin liqueur. There's lots and lots of gin liqueurs on sale at the moment, and they are often slightly cheaper than a gin, although sometimes they're expensive. But it's their alcohol value. So if it's anything less than 37.5%, you can't call it gin. So the gin liqueurs are usually around about the 20%, and they will have very often some of those lovely soft fruits or different flavors. Sometimes they change color, you know. That isn't a contemporary gin, because a contemporary gin is gin. It's 37.5% or higher. So the gin that you're tasting now, although it might have a different flavor than a normal gin, it is still gin, because there's juniper in there, and it's 37.5% alcohol by volume or more. So I reserve my judgment, and I try not to be too snooty about it. I have found that I've really enjoyed some contemporary gins, and I genuinely didn't think I'd like them. And again, why not try? You know, what's the worst that could happen? You find out you don't particularly like it. Well, fine, okay. Go on and find another one that you do. So, in terms of tonic, I said I might go on a quick tonic rant. Tonics came into sort of gin and tonic relatively recently, because, as I said, the Dutch never drank their gin, with anything. It was a neat spirit, like a whiskey. And originally in Britain, it wasn't drunk with any sort of mixers. It was only when the British were in India and they were having trouble with soldiers getting malaria that they had to take a tablet each day to stop them getting malaria. And the tablet was quinine, and quinine is a very bitter flavor. It's horrible to taste. And so in order to take this tablet, they tried to crush it up, and they added water, and that became known as their tonic water, their daily tonic water that they had to take to stop getting malaria. And the story goes that on one occasion, somebody decided to add their gin ration to their tonic water to make their tonic water taste easier to drink. So that the idea that tonic was added to gin to make it nicer to drink is the opposite. Gin was added to tonic water to make it easier to drink. And that idea of tonic water now that we have will still have some quinine in, and that's where it goes back to. Not the same levels it used to have, but there's always some quinine. And some people don't like gin, or they tell me that they don't like gin, but it's not the gin that they don't like, it's the quinine, it's the tonic that they don't like. So easiest thing to do, if you don't like tonic, don't drink it. It's not compulsory. You don't have to drink it with tonic, with gin. You could use soda water. Soda water is a lovely thing to add because you've got that slight fizz, so there's that feeling of gin and tonic. And again, as I say, if you want to add some lime juice as a little bit of garnish in there as well, that goes down beautifully. If it's a more deeper, heavier gin, or an Old Tom, for example, you can use, as I said, ginger beer, ginger ale. And the idea that because most of the drink is tonic, therefore you've got to use the best type of tonic, who's to know what is the best type of tonic for your palate? You've just tried 6 gins, and you know that certain ones appeal to you more than others, okay? And it's the same with tonic. Only up until a few years ago, there was effectively one major tonic manufacturer. I would suggest, if you want to try to find out how your palate is with different tonics, next time you're out shopping, buy the supermarket version of tonic, either their Indian tonic or their normal full fat or their diet tonic, or all 3. And when you go to a number of different supermarkets like Aldi, Lidl, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Waitrose, wherever, just buy a few different ones, as well as the more well-known brands if you've got some in the house. And next time you've got a nice bottle of gin, just try, each time you have a different gin, just try a different tonic with it. And just notice the difference. And if you can find a tonic that you like, that is half or a quarter of the cost of the more premium brand, then fine, great. Because some of it, I would argue, is about marketing and hype. And I think we should always, always, always trust our own palates. So if you can enjoy what's seen as a cheaper type of tonic, then great, do that. Okay, so I had my little rant, as I said I might do. So we tried our 6 gins. You found out about different styles of gins. You've also found out how you make gin, certainly in its compound stage. If you want to find out how you make gin, as in distilling it, there's a page in your booklet that goes through all that, and you can read that at your leisure. I hope that you've enjoyed this short tasting, and it's given you an opportunity to maybe just try and work out what you are actually tasting. Because ultimately, if a gin is good or not good, it's because you like it or you don't like it. And that's always going to be different, and it's always subjective. So trying to find out and learning what your palate likes, what flavors it enjoys, is something that you can continue to do. And the only way you're going to do that is by drinking more gin. So that is my parting gift. I'm saying to you, please drink more gin, because it will mean that we have more brands on the market, and you'll get to know what type of gins that you really enjoy, and there's lots more out there to try. So thank you for watching. Keep in touch with the Gin Lounge. We'll be back in towns and cities around the country soon, and hopefully we get a chance to meet you. Okay, bye-bye now.